I'd like to call special meeting back to order. And before we broke for lunch, we were finishing up the presentation by the chancellors. And I think what I'd like to do is take about 5 minutes per chancellor-ish to go back to actually go through the numbers that you have proposed and to take a look at and where those numbers are, and if you want to make any comments about how they might be modified. But so could we do that? Who wants to start?
Just elected me, so I'm first in the alphabet, UAA. So.
All right.
This is slide 15, Brandy, I believe. Yes, the president's presentation. It's called current structure proportional cut, slide 15, I believe.
Yeah, 16 on them.
Okay, one earlier, 15. Yeah. That's okay. No, you. Yes, that's it. So these are the cuts that we have come up with at UAA. Part of it is revenue. We have some property that we're in negotiations for leasing and other sorts of partnership opportunities. And I think that's also outlined on a slide in the president's presentation. We have some central general fund that we were holding aside for strategic projects, so that's going to be part of our cut. Contract services, travel, and furlough are additional cuts. The biggest would be administrative position reductions. That's throughout the university. Going on Myron's point, we do provide services to our 5 community campuses, and we've calculated the value of those services to be $4 million. So we provide HR, we provide IT, we provide a number of services, and devote staff to serving those campuses. So academic program reductions is listed there as 13.3, but it's a little misleading because of that 13.3, 5.2 million are administrative cuts in the provost's office, so academic affairs. So those would not be courses, programs, or faculty. And then 3.4 million of that 13.3 are reduction in adjunct positions and reassignment of tenure and tenure-track faculty away from research and service toward more teaching. And that, as I mentioned, that generates a savings of 3.4 million. So really the balance is 4.7 million that would be actual program eliminations that we would need to identify and then work with the other chancellors on making them coordinated across the system. Then you can see we're proposing additional faculty and staff vacancies that we already have, so we won't be filling those. We're proposing a cut in athletics operation and then facilities maintenance, and that leads us to the $50 million. Now, how this would change, I think, under the consortium model would be that we would collaborate on administrative processes for shared services across the 3 in the consortium model. And then we would also collaborate on academic program reductions so that we made sure that, where we can share and still offer something, we would be able to do that. So that's the concept from UAA. Any questions?
Okay. Are there questions? Regent Hughes.
I'm always, as Myron knows, I'm always concerned about these funds, the lapse funds. Mm-hmm. I've not heard the use of Central General Fund. Is that yours or?
It's UAA funds. So these are general funds that were not allocated to any purpose. We kept them aside for strategic projects that we're not going to be able to go forward with. So that's an additional amount of general fund that can be cut because it's not being used right now for anything.
How much is your total central general fund?
How much is our total central general fund?
I've never even heard of this before.
It's
How much?
It's general fund, unallocated general fund dollars in the UAA budget.
Right. So how much is it?
Well, our total general fund allocation is about $120 million.
But this must be different than that, right?
No, it's part of that.
So what you're saying is these are 3.1 million that you didn't utilize in this year.
And some of it would be probably salary savings too, but
Last year, I'm sorry, last fiscal year. So Myron, I thought this stuff all comes back. I'm confused because I've always understood it came back and doesn't stay with the institution.
I think here there's a difference between the central general fund and what we call unrestricted or unreserved fund balance, and that's the number I normally report to you. I think what Chancellor Sandine is conveying here is that this is money that they basically didn't have sort of allocating the expenses toward, so they just retain this amount of general fund without any underlying expense towards it.
So does every campus do that? Is that what UAF does? No? UAF? Okay.
Okay.
so it's handy because now we can cut it without cutting any positions.
Well, it's
or
handy,
programs.
but I'm not sure that's how we've done it in the past. Oh, thank you.
It was identified to retain for the transition between chancellors so I could come in and establish some strategic programs. But because of the turmoil in the past academic year, I wasn't able to really initiate much, and now those funds are available to cut.
So would it be fair to say that they're one-time funds, though? Is that right?
No, it's general funds. It's base dollars.
No, but I mean, will you be able to put that same line in there in the next fiscal year?
Well, I won't have to because our budget will be lower. It will be in there because the budget will be lower. Yeah, no, it's not one-time dollars. These are general fund dollars.
I don't get it.
All right. All right, thank you. Any other questions for the Chancellor Sandine? Regent Hargreaves.
If the Board of Regents took no action on your proposal and didn't take action on the President's proposal, just left things as they are, how much of this could you just proceed with and do anyway?
All of it.
You could accomplish all of this.
Yeah, I would like to be able to talk with the other chancellors to do that coordination on some of these budget lines.
One of the things that's bothering me is we're pretty much discussing things that I put in the category of administration. I don't know, as a Board of Control, what we're doing to pass any of this. It seems like I'm listening to administration rather than policy at this point. So I'm not sure where I'm coming from on this. I just don't feel like it's a policy matter as much as it is administration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Okay, go ahead.
I really appreciate you bringing up that point, Regent Hargreaves, because I've sat here and felt the same very thing, that a lot of the things that we're getting and diving into, which probably the times call for, but is really within the overall sphere of the president. And so I think, just as regents, I understand that this is a time where we're digging down and getting more information, but I think that we need to really be thoughtful of what our role is and where we begin and end, and where the president begins and ends as well. So I think that's going to be really important as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. All right. Chancellor White.
I mean, I'm happy to go through these if you want, but if the board.
No, I do want. I just, I think that we do want to stay up at the high level, but on the other hand, that was one of the reasons for this meeting, was to understand whether and to what extent these two proposals could meet the number. And so there is a number that we want to see about, and we want to see if it's a reasonable idea that the consortium model in this case can meet that number, and then we want to hear the same thing from the president. So please proceed.
Okay. The charge that we were given was to prepare a spreadsheet that would cut for UAF $68 million. So in response, from a UAF standpoint, $3 million of that would come from hiring freeze and vacancy holds, and that could be that renewable each year. $3,500,000 reduction in travel and procurement. We had already asked our units to reduce by 8.5 million, so that's a series of cuts that have already been taken or are already in place, and they cover a wide range of activities. We would reduce facilities maintenance by $4 million. We would reduce 10% of our adjuncts, which would cut down $400,000. Our total academic program budget is around $60 million. It's just less than $60 million. That's all the academic programs. We looked at a reduction across that of 18.4 million. That's not all academics per se, as Chancellor Sandin mentioned. Even costs that are cut in programs and reductions in services include administration. Unallocated organized research reduction of $6 million, recognizing that would have a significant impact on ability to get new research. Shifting $750,000 from athletics to private support, and there's a number of private support who stepped up to allow for that. Reduced employment contracts, and we've been encouraged by a number of people to go to 37.5-hour work weeks like the rest of the state, whether that would have to be a system level discussion or furloughs, but we think we could reduce $8 million there. We're a people organization, so changes in work week to 37.5 hours makes a big difference. We have already done a lot of shared services, and we would increase our shared services, which just mean that all of the units across the campus are using a common set of people for travel and purchasing and hiring and that sort of thing. That would save $6 million. We looked at some reorganizations and some consolidations to save administrative costs, $500,000. Changes to our dependent spouse and adjunct tuition model, tuition support, that's the tuition waivers, that'd be $500,000. And then we think we can get at least $1.5 million out of just collaboration across the system with UAA and UAS. We also are looking at some new revenues to offset that $68 million sales of non-trust UAF property and sales agreements for power that we would sell to GBEA. And then the part of the president's guidance in preparing these spreadsheets was to cut $68 million, no use of one time, and assume a 10% tuition increase for spring. There's actually an error in the spreadsheet. It says 5% in fall and 10% for spring. What that was supposed to say is 5% decline in enrollment, expecting a 5% decline in enrollment and a 10% tuition increase. We think that's a net revenue of $1.2 million. And then increase in some service and use fees of $750, and that adds up to $68 million. And that's without the use of any. We have a number of facilities that we think we could generate sales revenue. That would be one time though, and so that's not included in here, but could be used in transition.
Okay, thank you. And questions for Chancellor White? Regent Tuber.
Thank you. So my question, Chancellor White, is this, and maybe to the other chancellors as well, is that you had described before your financial presentation that you were directed to identify the cuts associated with the allocation of the overall cut that was attributed to UAF. Is there a conversation that ensued between the chancellors that if you weren't given a prescription that you would allocate cuts differently from the proposed $135 million cut?
Well, I'll respond and the other chancellors can respond. Our direction was on Monday to prepare by Thursday how we would distribute $68 million across for UAF. And then we had a discussion later in the week of flesh out option 2 a little bit more, which led to then the conversation over the weekend. But already, at least we had talked, and in my opinion, we could get 1.5 million just by sharing. I think there's a lot more that a more detailed conversation about these could develop. But that, between last week and today, that has not happened yet. If anybody else had a comment? No. Thank you.
Any other questions? Regent Hargraves.
Mr. Chairman, I would assume that operation and maintenance at each campus is a pretty big item. How do you get those services? Is that contracted, or do we hire personnel to do the various activities in operation and maintenance?
If that's an either or question, Regent Hargraves, the answer is yes. So it's a mixture. We have some of our own people on the campuses who do facility maintenance, and we also contract for specialty work as well. And there's regular review of those contracts to determine what's most cost effective, what's the best service. All of those variables are in play as universities make those decisions.
Did you say which company you have the contract with?
I didn't say which company. We have many contractors for our facilities.
So you don't have a national type contractor taking care of the Anchorage campus, for example?
The Anchorage campus addresses its own procurement for facility maintenance, as does UAF, as does UAS. Now, that is an opportunity, perhaps, for consolidating that procurement. We talked about that extensively during the strategic pathways process to try to get critical mass in some of our purchasing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Chancellor Coffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The task given to UAS was to look at a reduction of $10 million. So what you have, if we could pull that up for the screen. Thank you. On the left-hand side, you see an array of strategies and associated savings from those strategies, and then some notes. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see reference to some one-time funding that would be required, given that we're already in the midst of the FY20 year, and it's an assessment of how we cover those costs. But on the left-hand side, the first two lines focus on academic program consolidation, reduction, and elimination, as well as elimination of staff and admin personnel. In recent years, we have resisted reductions of faculty, and we've had very few faculty reductions, in fact, over the last 4 and 5 years. And instead, more of the reductions have been amongst staff and admin personnel. And in this case, we felt that we were at a point where we would need to go into some of the academic programs. So it would be a matter of coming back to this board with proposals to reduce or eliminate academic programs. We also have included facilities maintenance and renewal and renovation monies, some reductions in anticipated Alaska College of Education initiatives. We had set aside some money for the 1% salary compensation for staff, and our understanding is that that's not going forward, and that would be included into our reduction. Reductions for Juneau-based utilities, IT, R&R, marketing, and then shifting tuition waiver funding from tuition dollars, which currently fund those, putting those into other student services, and then using UFB as a means of funding tuition waivers for students. Some other replacing facilities, general fund with the facilities fee. And then there's reference to deallocation of centrally pooled GF. You may recall that we have been moving towards the construction of the Auk Bay facility, which has been discussed by this board on multiple occasions. It's our sense that under these budget circumstances, that's a project we would not be able to pursue. And so we would take some of the funds that have been set aside centrally with the intent to use them on that project would be used to fill the gap that we're talking about here. There's reference to a deallocation of benefit savings, and we had set those aside because we were uncertain about where the tuition funds for the 25% reduction of career and technical education classes would come from. Those monies that had been set aside would be allocated to this purpose. And then there would be an additional undesignated 7% reduction to Juneau campus budgets, academic, student services, facilities, and so forth, and an undesignated reduction yet to be determined, the components of that to both our Sitka and Ketchikan campuses. And so together, that adds up to the $10 million amount. The one other thing I'll note is we did build this FY20 budget based on flat credit hour production originally, but taking all the circumstances into account, we've modeled this based upon a 10% reduction overall in student credit hours. Currently, our numbers are up by 2.5%, but we think the net impact of that would be about $415,000 in tuition monies. The president did ask that we build in the possibility of a 10% increase in tuition for spring semester 2020, so that is built into our modeling here. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? I think you made it pretty clear.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that presentation. So we're going to segue now to President Johnson and
well, thanks.
Well,
before we do that, for those of you who are not sufficiently depressed, to add to it just a little bit, the statewide MAU, we received a proportional target of $8 million. That's despite the fact that over the last 5 years, our reduction has been double the average across the university system. You've heard reference to that cost allocation of the community campuses and UAS from that appropriation, so that's $4 million. There are roughly 16, I'm looking at Myron, ballpark, vacant positions. Those would be held vacant. And then we would need to find $2.4 million in people, personnel reduction. And where those would come from, obviously, would depend upon the decisions that are made about structure. So at this point, it's TBD in terms of where in statewide administration those positions would be reduced. I think moving now on to a discussion of the single university accreditation model. Let's see that I assume we've spent enough time. This was the slide the chancellors presented earlier today. Very, very simple picture of what we envision a single university model to look like. I think it's critically important to emphasize multiple locations. This would not be in Anchorage, in Fairbanks, in Southeast, or in Talkeetna. It would be in all of those places. That would be the idea, to use technology and people to provide academic programs and other services based on enrollments and based on where those people are, where the demand actually is. So there would absolutely be faculty and staff providing academic programs and student services wherever there were a sufficient number of students to warrant that, and then where there aren't, we would rely increasingly on online technology. So again, one university, multiple locations. While this challenge is something that nobody wanted here, it is, I think, an opportunity to rethink how we organize the university. I think we're able to direct more resources, a larger share of our scarce resources to academics and student services while reducing and simplifying administration. I think it also has the benefit of increasing critical mass of faculty and staff across the system. I think we have quite a few small academic departments, and if we are able to bring them together, I think we have more critical mass there. And that's the same with staff. And I think also this builds on the constitutional and legal foundation of a single university, a single employer, a single legal entity. Instead of multiple colleges for each major field, as you'll see in a moment, we're looking at a single college that would be distributed. I am aware of universities, say business schools, for example. Some of the premier business schools in the country, if not the world, have campuses, one dean, 3,500 miles from each other. So it is certainly possible to accomplish and provide superb quality education. We would be looking to work with the faculty and work with staff and student governance groups to develop common curricula. That really is the province of our faculty. Common calendars, common course blocks, billing, transcripts, applications, and other processes, again, to try to bring down cost and invest in a student experience that is consistent, because a very large percentage of our students take courses from more than one university at a time, and also very high quality, rather than 3 separate different systems for many of these items. I also envision our research institutes with system-wide scope. Now our major research institutes are at the Fairbanks campus with limited opportunities, with some exceptions. We do have some inter-university research partnerships, but I think there are real opportunities to expand those so that those research institutes are more open to faculty participation from the other universities. And we would look at service units being similarly organized. And then we've already talked about this, several examples of multi-campus universities with a single accreditation.
Quick question from Regent Purdue.
Question. If we did that, would we be able to have PhD students across the system?
A program would be available to students wherever they are, assuming they could do their coursework, whether it's a combination of face-to-face or online, yes. We do a little bit of that now, not very much, and I think it would be really an exciting opportunity to increase that. Here are the benefits and the risks of a single accreditation. I don't want to go through the details here, but emphasize reducing duplicative administration and focusing resources on our mission, on what we've talked about here today. It really is an opportunity, I think, to work with the faculty on developing the best curriculum and a common one that our students would enjoy. This received preliminary support from the task force. It wasn't a binding vote, but it certainly was at the end of their one-day meeting. Admittedly, a very high-level review of the issues. It did receive their preference after that meeting. I think, again, it increases opportunities for university-wide faculty collaboration in research administration and in education. Actually, this is an area where we see lots of collaboration. I found that through the Strategic Pathways process, that at the level of faculty and at the level of students, there's a tremendous amount of collaboration. And of course, this is consistent with legislative intent. There's some misunderstandings about the origin of this legislative intent that I think it's important to clarify. The sponsor of this language in the original form directed the university to implement a single accreditation structure. We found out about that through a friend in the legislature, and we were able to modify it so that it respected the appropriate authority of this board, so that it was simply consideration of this rather than a direction to the board. There are some risks we've talked about those, and one specifically is the accreditation, institutional accreditation process. To your question earlier in the day, Regent O'Neill, we have been in regular communication with the Northwest Commission. They read the papers, they see what's going on here, and they have expressed strong support for whatever approach we like to take. They have insisted upon, correctly, I think, in their view, and it's absolutely consistent with our view, that the impacts on students would need to be mitigated as much as possible. There would need to be actually a student by student by student by student plan to teach out and transition those students. And so that is repeatedly their priority. Clearly, that's our priority. They indicated that they would be willing to expedite the review processes to a matter of months to accommodate the changes that we would propose. Certainly, it would be a rigorous process. I would say that the current administration at the Commission is much more willing to collaborate with us on this than the previous administration was. The campuses have raised the issue, and I agree with them in terms of the possible loss of differentiation among the locations. As I indicated in my opening remarks this morning, for many years I've been a strong supporter of different missions at each one of our universities. And so I think that's something that we'll need to really focus on and make sure that there's still a local connection and a local presence wherever the University of Alaska at fill in blank is operating. And I think we will definitely need to make sure that we're staying in close touch with our communities across the state. Not every decision will need to be made in a particular building in a particular city. And I think, again, here we'll need to be very intentional about that connection to local communities and leaders and employers especially. So we took the numbers that you've already seen from the universities and we rolled them up. And we also rolled in statewide numbers here. And this bar chart compares current the one accreditation model with the three university model, and the totals here. The far left bar here is last year's budget. The next one is the single accreditation budget as a percentage. That's really important here. That axis on the left there is not dollar magnitude, it's percentage. So it really is looking at the share of whatever the budget is goes to this particular activity area. And so there with academics, you see that the highest share of resources going into academics would be the single accreditation model. Similarly with student services, research is a little less than the three university model. Public service is also a little bit less. But I think another important one, in addition to the higher share going into academics and student services, a considerably lower amount is going into administration and operations.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
If I could, to the president on this slide. It's going to take a number of years to go from what we have today to a single university, should that be the wishes of the board. At what point in time, how many years from now, do we see these savings? This won't turn around, this won't be FY21.
Regent Parker, we have no choice but to make reductions this year. The question is how we make these reductions. Do we make them in using this model? And so we are making decisions, and I'll show you some examples here in just a moment. Do we make them using this model, or do we make them using the model using our current structure? The money must be saved, period.
The money must be saved, but there's going to be a lot of administrative cost associated with going with one university. It's not something that you can just turnkey and you got one university. There will be a lot of administrative cost, both in terms of the accreditation for the university and then the accreditation for the 9 colleges. So, and we don't, where's the money coming from to absorb that cost to do this? You know, we don't have a little savings account or a permanent fund that we can draw from to do that. So is it coming from operations? Is it coming from academic? It will cost time and money.
That is true. And that's why, and so you're highlighting something that I think is important to keep in mind, going back to the house is burning metaphor. This $136 million goal is conservative, right? There will be transition issues, no question about that. In addition, because we're already a month or 8.5% into the year, we will have a larger cut that's compounding as a result of the timing of the situation. Plus, of course, we can't precisely predict, but there's no question that we will have a negative effect on enrollment and the tuition that comes from that and other revenue sources. So in terms of the actual accreditation moves, as the officers at the Northwest Commission have communicated to us, their suggestion is not that we reinvent and redo, come up with new accreditations out of whole cloth, but that we essentially use one of our current institutional accreditations as the framework for the new university accreditation, and then go through what I think Chancellor Sandeen mentioned earlier today, the substantive change process to maintain that accreditation. So again, we're not reinventing, renewing something. And then over the long term, instead of 3 time-consuming, important accreditation processes for institutions, instead of assuming that every one of our colleges and schools has a programmatic accreditation, which is not exactly correct, but it's reasonable. We would move from 3 institutional accreditations to 1, and we would move from 17 program accreditations to 9. Again, there's more detail when it comes to the program accreditation side, but I think it makes the point that moving to a single institutional accreditation and to a single college model saves a lot of time and a lot of money in both institutional and program accreditation.
If I might follow up. So a couple of years ago, former Chancellor Thomas prepared a report that looked at, should we have a single university? Should we look at changing? And so this was something we addressed 3 years ago. The recommendation from former Chancellor Thomas was that we stay with what we have, because over time, this saves us money. It would be expensive to go with one university. Other than a loss of money, a decline in student enrollment, what's changed that the recommendation from Chancellor Thomas today is wrong?
I think Chancellor Thomas identified risks of that. Of our consideration at that time. I'd say there are 2 really big things that have changed since then. One, our house was not on fire then, so we weren't forced to look as seriously at making major structural changes. And the second thing that is very real is something I mentioned just a moment ago, and that is the change in perspective, which in some degree relates to the severity and the suddenness of the state funding cut, the very real change in attitude among the leaders at the Northwest Commission.
Every year since I've been on the Board of Regents, we have had budget reductions and had to deal with these issues. So the risks haven't changed from what Chancellor Thomas identified. They've gotten more severe, and my concern with one university is it's going to take us time, it's going to take away money from the academic programs as we put money into the administration to put together one university. And in the slides that we have, I didn't see anything with respect to athletic programs, what happens to the athletic programs and the accreditation that we have.
What we do with athletic programs would be something that we would work with our chancellors and with the communities on. You may recall from the strategic pathways process that we looked at a number of options for our athletic programs, including a consortium approach, where instead of 21 teams and 2 athletic programs, we would have one athletic program with the minimum NCAA 10 team. So that would certainly be something that we could look at as we build this process. And I would suggest that while the $25 million cut, which is the biggest one that we received prior to this year, those are very serious cuts, no question about it. But $136 million is more than 5 times that. So pretty big in magnitude difference. So moving forward at a high level, the graphic that I just shared with you is simply a representation of these numbers. So I don't know that I need to spend time here. I think you got the point from the previous slide. Well, what if we were to, go ahead, sorry.
If we know that the governor is talking about a step-down approach, and let's say that what he's put on the table is the $85 million, there's still the same amount over 2 fiscal years. Roughly the same amount, isn't it? Or is it less? I mean, is it the same? Is it 136 basically?
Yeah. Close.
What's my question in my mind? The question about your number of 136 that you're building this on, and you mentioned that it doesn't have the delta for loss of enrollment or loss of federal dollars, that kind of thing. Would you advise us to continue on with assuming that we're going to need to save 136 in 1 fiscal year?
As Mr. Barnhill indicated, that is today the law. We really appreciate the great work of our legislature to try to claw back some of that. And so that's a good thing. But I don't know this. I'm speculating, so it's risky to do this speculation, but I think the numbers that were presented to you and presented by Mr. Barnhill today may foreshadow numbers that result from the governor's consideration of our budget. And if that were to be the case, I think that's not a bad assumption at this point. If that were to be the case, then I would be bringing to you the same options for your consideration. That is still a huge number, more than 3 times the biggest budget cut we've taken over the last 6 years.
Over outcomes is specific to the value of the credit hour, or if it's otherwise identified?
Through the chair, Regent Tuber, I think that the concern over outcomes goes to a point that President Johnson made this morning, and that is retention rate, graduation rate are relatively low in comparison to the university's peers. I completely acknowledge the point that there can be amazing successes even with somebody that graduates 10, 15 years after entering college. But in aggregate, there is a concern about state spending money and students dropping, and that drop rate is higher than it would be, higher than some median drop rate at state universities elsewhere. So, I think there's a valid concern about retention and how that impacts state dollars that don't ultimately lead to some value-added education or degree for the student. I guess I would suggest, I love this conversation, Chair Davies. It does seem like it leads directly into having, more informal discussions like we started 2 weeks ago with staff, bring in Regent Hughes' committee into that discussion, and just absolutely be thrilled to participate in that.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate you clarifying that. Regent Hargreaves.
I get a question in before you leave. He doesn't want my question. I didn't get this in this morning earlier, but I wanted to say to you that the 2-year glide path for this is fine to a certain extent, and this doesn't reflect the Board of Regents to my knowledge, but I had hoped personally that we could see a 3-year. I think that administratively they could handle a 3-year without being so devastating to existing students and professional staff. I just wanted to pass that on to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Regent Perdue.
Sorry, Mike. And I think that the challenge here is the duty that we have to the students. So we really are concentrating if we're using a fiscal year approach, we're concentrating our reductions in a 6-month period because of the June 30 hard stop. And, in doing a lot of systems change that I worked in the state government, at least we had the opportunity to use some supplementals or some capital money, some bridging, that kind of thing. And here it's the bus is driving and we're taking the wheels off right at the same time. And so the challenge, the numbers are huge, and I think they're too huge. I don't want to misunderstand that. But in terms of the way that the fiscal year works, we are having to concentrate incredible reductions. So it's probably I don't know if you knew that, but that I felt that you needed to hear that.
Thank you.
Okay. Regent Mania.
I can't help but wonder if the glide path, so to speak, is extended, how that might have a negative effect on student enrollment. If this is taken care of immediately, then students or future students would know what's to come. But if there's more to come next year and the year after that, I would think that it would have a negative effect on student enrollment. I mean, unless you can change my mind, I can't help but think it's better to take care of this business sooner rather than later.
Regent Dewar.
To Regent Bania, I wouldn't propose that we leave any uncertainty. I would suggest that if there's an opportunity for whether we call it negotiation or reconciled positions, that we know where we're going to be, but we simply extend the period of time that the reductions are applied. Because I think what we've heard, whether it's from the chancellors or from the administration and the president, that the extraordinary impact is going to be unfathomable. We don't have the ability to create a transition that's healthy. And in the absence of a number that we can apply in a prudent manner, working out something with OMB or the administration on how it is that we would take the number that at best or at worst is the ultimate general fund appropriation, whether it's applied this year or next year. I think that I don't think that there's any dispute that having more time to be able to apply in a prudent manner if folks are going to be looking for jobs, does that mean over the course of the next 12 days or the next 12 months? I think that that's going to be an important service that the regions, if we can negotiate a term that's more acceptable, we owe it to both our students and to our employees across the university system.
I understand your point. At the same time, I think that there very well could be an unforeseen consequence in that if a prospective student sees that, okay, this year we cut X number of dollars and next year it's X plus Y, and they weren't sure what was going to be here, then they might very well consider attending somewhere else.
I think that would be our charge, Mr. Chair. With your indulgence, I think that would be our charge to define precisely what it is what the university is going to look like. But it's going to be upon us to take the numbers that we're going to be provided and apply them so that there isn't any uncertainty. In fact, there's more certainty because at this point we're scrambling, trying to understand where the cuts can occur, and we don't know. The chancellors are doing their best. The administration certainly doing its best, but we're severing limbs without any without the benefit of understanding what is and isn't reasonably excised. I understand where you're coming from. I take the position that if a reduction in force is going to occur, giving people notice is the appropriate approach for that, rather than telling them, here's your pink slip and you're no longer employed, or your program that you've enrolled in is no longer available.
Regent Garrett.
The students are already experiencing negative impact and considering where to go. We're doing everything we can to convince them to stay, of course, and the main concern is with accreditation if we go to the single institution model. Graduate students that are a year and a half away from their dissertation want to know if they've invested 8 years for nothing.
I have a couple of process questions.
Sure.
So in leaving today and giving the president direction around the structure, it can be an and solution, not an or. That's what I'm hearing around the table. And my question is I do think we need to deeply explore the one university structure and want to give Jim the means that he needs so that he can engage our accrediting bodies. Because it seems to me that when I read the motion, it says preparing to transition to a single institutional accreditation over the 2019-2020 academic year. So there is a process that we need to put in place. And from what I hear from Jim, that we need the chancellors working together to find the sweet spots of collaboration, the reductions, and then working together to figure out how do we transition into this potential single university. So I don't think it's it's an either or. I think what you said, Andy, is this could be an and, right? Is where we continue to move forward, but give Jim the means that he needs so that he can deeply engage in looking at what the single university looks like as we prepare for our September meeting. Keeping in mind our strategic priorities and our values that we talked about to guide the president in doing so. But I want to be clear here, as Mary said, I understand that this is an unprecedented time, but I see that we have one employee that works for us on this board, and that's Jim Johnson. And I think that it's extremely important that we take up his recommendation and move forward, giving him parameters so that we can continue to do the work and look at the whole picture.
Regent Tuber.
Getting all my talking in for the year. Thank you, Gloria. Yeah, it's my pleasure. So here's where I'm challenged, is that it seems to me we have an opportunity upon us, and I'm not certain whether this is accurate or not, but I would say it appears that we have an opportunity where the numbers that are identified on page 14 could be modified with a $40 million add, which means UAS and UAA, and I'm just choosing randomly, but it seems to me that with the governor's attention on research, that with some negotiation, it seems to me that there could be a restoration of $40 million, which would substantially lessen the hit for at least two of our MAUs. At least two, right? Perhaps all three, but at least two, and statewide. And that provided we execute the same plan that would be proposed, whether it's the plan that would be endorsed by the chancellors or the plan that's being endorsed by the president, and I'm disappointed that they're not reconciled, but suffice it to say that regardless of the plan, that we are simply extending the execution period rather than confining it to the narrow space that we have right before us, right? That we are giving ourselves the opportunity. It's not an ideal plan, but it's one that's superior to the one that we're confronted by. We're adding $40 million in, and we're giving ourselves an extended period of time for execution. And I can't see why we wouldn't choose that option.
My question around that is, if we have that 40 million added back in, and with the time that's lapsed in this fiscal year, what is our burn rate, and when do we have to make these decisions? So I think that they're all valid points, but how do we get that information quickly so we can move forward?
You mean the information about our burn rate?
Well, I understand what our burn rate is currently, but what I'm saying is, if the 40 million were to come back in, taking Andy's comments into consideration, how much time does that give us as we deeply research and review the options before us? Or maybe it's a consolidation of both options.
I think I'm speculating here, but I think instead of running out of cash in February, we run out of cash in April.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, Regent Hughes.
I may have misunderstood. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have misunderstood, but I thought in my question to Mike that the governor was going to look at what the regions accomplished and decide whether that 40 million would be given back to us. I mean, it's not like we can just sit. Mike's right there. We can. We have a plan. The president has a recommendation, and within that recommendation, we need to flesh out what a single university with the help of the accreditation people would look like. And that's where we have, 6 weeks to do that. And that's not very long. And meanwhile, the governor, we still have the governor at play and the legislature, of course. And so we don't really know where we're going to be, when we're going to be there. But we don't know what we don't know. So in other words, we have to make our decision irrespective of the universe, because if the universe all of a sudden gives us a huge gift, great. Then, then we will have done the work we need to do. And then we have, and perhaps it would only cover our melt rate or burn rate. I mean, I'm very concerned because I'm not so sure that the addition of the 40 million is something that doesn't come without a regent determination with respect to the what did Mike call them, the root cost drivers. That's a financial term. Root cost driver. So I guess that's why I think we need to continue our work and to go forward. And I Andy, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate the opportunity to have Mike here and for us to discuss all ideas.
Okay. Chancellor White.
Thanks. I think in this conversation of accreditation, of course, UAS just had their accreditation visit in April. UAA had theirs last year. Ours is in September. And I think the accreditors, who I'm sure are listening, need to know, this has been a year's worth of work in preparing that. They have been scheduled for months. They have already in the process of reviewing all of our documents. They need to know what kind of accreditation review they're doing. And I think that if there's a discussion of, well, they're going to call after this meeting and say, who are we sending to UAF in September? It's a totally different group. If there's one accreditation on the horizon than it is if they're actually reviewing our accreditation documents. And so I think that's a consideration to take. And thank you.
Mm-hmm. Regent Parker.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion. So we have a motion on the floor that the Board of Regents directs the President to work in conjunction with the chancellors and their administration, Faculty Alliance, Staff Student Alliance on the 3 consortium model, and that we continue to consider at some point in the future a plan to transition from 3 separate to a single university. That's my motion. And if I get a second, I'll talk more to it.
Second.
As Chancellor White just pointed out, the accreditors are coming to UAF in September. They're looking for direction. Based on comments that have been made today, I don't see where in 1 year we have the people, the time, or the money to accredit a single university and 9 colleges without putting our students, our staff, and our faculty at risk. Over the last 6 months, there's been an equal amount of stress from students and staff and faculty as we've looked at a path forward. And there is concern about one university. And as we move forward, if we decide that one university is our only option at this time, I think that creates more uncertainty. And as I said earlier, I believe it takes away money from our academic programs and our students to administer trying to put together one university with 9 colleges under it. So that is my motion, and I think if we move forward with the UA consortium model, we will be able to meet the needs. We'll be able to live within the budget, even though it is going to be hard for everybody, and everybody will be impacted. The chancellors and their staff and the list of people that worked on this, they have the knowledge, they have the expertise, they have the students, staff, and faculty in mind as we move forward. So, thank you.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor.
The majority of the emails that the regents have received advocate for the 3 university model. If we can, as I said earlier, we'll know our operating baseline in a few months' time, at which point we can then reconsider if we are ready to move to a 1 university. I think we need to get through this accreditation at UAF so that we have 3 accredited universities before we move forward into a single accredited institution model.
Regent Anderson.
They may have the expertise and the ideas. They don't have the money. We have to look at the burn rate of the dollars that are going out the door every single month, and we are playing Russian roulette by not moving on this quickly and at this meeting, as far as I'm concerned. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the state of Alaska and to the university to make sure that we have money to run this college or this university. And if we're going to be out of money in April, we don't have a college to wait till September. That's the house that's on fire. I think we have kicked this around for so long, and I just think the chickens are coming back to roost. As far as agreements between people that are running the three universities, there's undue competition between the three, and I just don't see this kumbaya song that we're going to sing around the campfire that is going to resolve this issue. We are going to cut $135 million, whether over 1 year or 2 years. We're going to see that cut. But like I said, I think we're just playing Russian roulette going down this track.
Regent Perdue.
I don't know what the consortium model is. I do know what we have today, and I'm understanding that the chancellors are saying they can, particularly in the academic areas, do more collaboration. I think if we adopt some consortium model, I don't know what direction that gives our president. I could, if you look at Mary's amendment or thing, it really had a stepped approach. And one thing that we could consider is giving the president, actually maybe he already has the authority, but acknowledging he has the authority to reduce administrative costs now. He has the, as Regent Hargraves says, he has the authority to manage the university, as long as he's not eliminating academic programs. So, in relation to the burn rate, that could be a valuable tool if we're clear to the president that he has the authority to do that. I don't see how the campuses themselves can put together like mutual travel or, consolidating of administrative stuff. That's kind of wasteful to do it that way as opposed to in a centralized way. He has proposed a plan for September. He has not proposed to execute. He has proposed a plan for September in our documents. And we could ask him to slow down on that, and then we could have a special meeting, soon after September 17th, but we couldn't wait too much longer. And then I think what he's asking for is to prepare a plan for a single university, not to implement a single university. And we can say when that needs to be, and he can come and report to us that he's got more time because we've got more money. Because we would all love that, including the president. So I guess I would say, Lisa, that if we could amend your motion, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
There's a motion on the table.
I'm asking her if she could amend her motion. Well, maybe we could just vote on the motion.
Just call the question.
We'll just call the question. I don't want to call a question. Actually, somebody else might have a thought.
So I've got Regent Garrett.
No, I'm going to go. I want to go after you. You went after.
Thank you,
I've
Chair.
got Regent Garrett first, and then whichever one of you wants to talk.
Thank you, Chair Davies. With all due respect, the Russian roulette that we are playing is with the earth and climate, and you're going to hear me say that for 2 years until you believe it. The direction, it should be a center in all of our conversations, and it's not, but it will be soon enough. As Regent O'Neill pointed out, the directive of the president would be to work with the chancellors, and they've indicated that they're ready to start acting tomorrow. So the cuts are going to happen. The reductions are going to happen no matter what.
Regent O'Neill. Regent Tuber.
So I support the motion. I support the motion because I understand it to be one where we're giving the opportunity to chancellors who have had a task delegated to them to evaluate how it is they would implement a reduction. They've come back, and as I understand it today, that they have advised us that they can accommodate the manifestation of the reductions. And what's more is I understand that there's an opportunity before us that we could potentially see a reduction to the impact that we might experience in this first year, if not something that has yet to be determined. What I don't want to see, and what I don't think is prudent, is for us to foreclose the opportunity for continuation of accreditation for each of the 3 MAUs where we can't recover in the event that there's an opportunity before us. And it's not meant with any disrespect to President Johnson, because I know that, and I say this with all sincerity, I know that he eats, breathes, and sleeps this university. And so what I think the directive that the Board of Regents had given him at our last meeting was to please prepare a couple of options for the Board of Regents to consider, and he has done so, and he's brought back recommendations. And I think his highest form of recommendation might be that he's delegated to the chancellors a presentation to the regents that allows us to consider whether or not we're going to migrate from 3 to 1 or maintain a 3 to 3 until such time as a 3 to 1 makes more sense.
President Johnson, can you address the accreditation issue?
What aspect of the accreditation issue?
So the concern that Chancellor White raised, and how under the
visit, the accreditation.
Yeah, and how we would move forward into a single accreditation circumstance, and what the game plan would be for dealing with that.
Well, that's what my team and I were scheduled to speak with the president of the Northwest Commission on at 4:30 today. Was to, depending upon the decision made by this board, we would then be charting out the course. What would the process be? What would the schedule be? What steps would need to be taken in order to accomplish it? And again, not inventing a new accreditation, but it would be basically using one of the existing accreditations as the scaffold, the basis for a substantive change and an accreditation for the entire system. This is going to take months. There's no question about that. I think Chancellor White raises a good question here. It wouldn't be, I mean, clearly we have full institutional accreditation for UAA and UAS. There is a question, though, and the Chancellor has raised this with me, and he's also talked directly with the Commission about the status of his own institutional accreditation. So as I think the Chancellor indicated, and I suspect it's true, the accreditors are listening in or watching this meeting today. They've paid very, very close attention. In fact, what's happening here at the university has been a focus of attention in the entire national higher education community. If you look at the number of front page articles on in the Chronicle of Higher Education and other national media, it's being watched. So I can't lay out exactly what that timeline would be until I know the direction of this board. And again, I do know, however, that they will work with us and that there is a path forward here that would be expeditious. And I don't think that it would involve the huge amount of time and resources that that some of us are talking about. I don't believe that's the case. There are also programmatic accreditation issues as well. You know, if we're going to combine, let's say, our schools of engineering, which one? You know, what does that look like? We did present a real prototype of a consolidation, and what the upside of that consolidation would be, what the numbers would, you know, the costs that would come out as a result of a consolidation of one of our colleges. And so I think actually it's a really good prototype. We've provided an academic prototype and also an administrative prototype for how to look at combining a couple of units and then reducing the cost in those units in a way that maintains the academic programs and student access to those degrees. So this is the kind of thinking. It's, I believe, on slide 32 of your package. This is exactly the kind of thinking that if you gave us direction today, then we would.
He's got it, Ken.
This is the kind of analysis that we would do in other academic areas, and then start identifying real costs that could come out effective January 1st. That's when we need to, you know, we've sort of given the fall semester a pass academically in order to maintain our students' programs. But with even an $80 million, $90 million cut, we've got to move out and make sure that we're starting to save serious money January 1, which means that we have to have notice to people by the end of October, which means we need to have made decisions about who's staying, who's not, by probably early October, which means that we need to make programmatic decisions at this board by, you know, early September, early mid-September.
Regent Garrett and then
President Johnson, I've seen your one model institution from the beginning of my time on the board, which wasn't that long ago, and it's beautiful. It's pretty on paper, and it's absolutely worth implementing. The people aren't ready. They're not ready. The students, the staff, and the faculty don't want it. The chancellors can start fundraising immediately, and all we need is dollars. That's what we need right now to get us through.
Yeah.
Am I mistaken?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who communicate to me.
I have one more thing to say as well.
And say that they don't feel like they can communicate their views. There are people in this room who hold those views. It's not a disprovable hypothesis, so I'm not going to assert it strongly. But there are a lot of voices out there across the university system who are sick and tired of the current structure and are looking forward to something that is going to be more viable for the long term.
I had one more thing to say. If we want to move forward with a one institution that's accredited under one of our current institutions, really it should be UAF, our flagship institution, which isn't accredited until September. I think moving to the one university should happen after that, if at all.
Regent Neal.
So there's a lot of tension in this conversation. I think there's tension between, you know, the unknown, the real fear around the unknown. And when we engaged in this conversation a couple of weeks ago, I pulled the meaning of fear and then the meaning of discernment. And I keep going back to our fiduciary duty as a regent. And what I'm trying to pull up in my heart, because I really care about this institution and all the people and our students who will be impacted. But being appointed and confirmed to be on this board is I have a duty to the institution, and really trying to create boundary around the emotion and think about what's in front of us and trying to get, as Andy was talking about, the good information. So I cannot in good faith and in my discernment at this point vote for this motion. I can if we could try to figure out how to ensure that we don't clip our president's wings, to ensure that he has the authority to move forward. And if we're going to do a consolidation where we work with where chancellors work with the university. We don't work with the chancellors. The chancellors work with, the university president to reduce costs. And we say to Jim, please continue to move forward to look at this single university system. I'd feel like I could walk out of this room and knowing that at least I did my job today based on the burn rate on a daily basis, based upon where we stand with our budget, based upon what we heard from the governor's office. And hear me when I say this, I want to make sure that it's just clear that we at all, that we keep all of the academic programs intact that we can keep intact in supporting our students. And so it seems and it feels that there's a fight in administration right now that we're trying to deal with, and we can't be referees of that. We can't. And we have a duty to this institution, a duty to our students to do what's right and have good discernment. And so I'm hopeful that maybe the maker of the motion, because I'm not even sure what the motion says, that if we could add the support to the president on the single university, that would fit the conversation that we're having within our values.
Or, pardon me, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, or what we could do is start over.
Can you talk into your mic so I can hear you?
Rather than amend Lisa's motion, we could start over.
I'm not sure what the motion says, so Lisa.
Brandy, could you read Lisa's motion?
The best that I could get was the motion directs the president to work in connection with the chancellors and the governance organizations on the consortium model. Is that correct, Regent Parker?
That is partially correct. I also added in working to develop a plan for us to consider one university. But the focus at this point in time would be the UA Consortium 3-university model as presented by the chancellors.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm wondering if maybe we could just take a 5-minute break and work with General Counsel Hostina to develop a potential motion that hopefully it would be a friendly amendment to Lisa's motion.
Sure.
Would that be?
Mr. Chairman, did that motion get a second?
Yes, it did.
Yes, it did.
It did, yes. Yeah. Okay.
I've tried to get in here, but it's been tough. I've been looking at this from a different point of view. I mean, in my mind today, it's been like a tennis match, to be honest with you. Ball's over here, the consortium, then it's over there with the single model, you know. And in a way, I've come to a conclusion that the chancellors made very good points. They made many points that I really liked. And many of those points, to me, could easily fit into the single university model. Whereas the single university model certainly doesn't fit very well with what they're proposing. So it's difficult for me to support the current motion because I believe that many of the good things that they proposed could easily fit into the single university model. So there's my thoughts, and I'm kind of getting tired of the tennis match, to tell you the truth.
So do you want to take a 5-minute break to work on a motion? All right, we'll take a 5-minute break.